You know, too often when we talk about the great horror filmmakers, we always end up talking about the same guys, John Carpenter, Wes Craven, George A. Romero, that we kind of get lost in the fact that there are some great ones working today. So I wanted to pit the two best of this era against each other and decide a winner. So who is it? James Wan or Mike Flanagan? Hey, what's up everybody? It's Nick here, and today I wanted to pit two of the GOATs against each other and decide a winner. Now, the impetus for this video was Scott Derrickson fired off a tweet last night praising James Wan and calling him the greatest of his generation as a filmmaker. And a lot of people would agree. And even someone like me that wouldn't pick Wan necessarily, it's hard to make an argument against Wan. But I can make an argument for someone, and that someone is Mike Flanagan. So today I want to pit these two against each other, and I'll go over their body of work and give you my experience with each one. And then give you why I pick who I pick, and then I want to hear from you guys who you pick and why. Alright, so starting with James Wan, full disclosure here guys, I'm only going to talk about his horror movies, and that works because I haven't seen his other movies. I haven't seen Fast and Furious 7, I haven't seen the Aquaman movies. I'm just talking about his horror movies. Now, James Wan, I mean, he's made some bangers. He has created some franchises that have gone on for decades and decades now at this point. James Wan has earned his right to be on that Mount Rushmore in the 21st century. My history with James Wan started with Dead Silence, believe it or not, before I even saw Saw. And Dead Silence scared the crap out of me because Mary Shaw and, ventriloquism and dummies and stuff, I don't know. I don't know if it was the fact that I grew up loving Goosebumps and the Night of the Living Dummy ones were like my favorite, that I just did not like it. I didn't like it. I kept thinking of Slappy, okay? Like I just didn't like it. No thanks. And then you had Billy in Dead Silence that kind of just looked like Slappy, which I feel like was intentional. But like, no, not a fan of that. So he creeped me out with Dead Silence. Not long after that, I saw Saw. And of course, the ending of that movie left me breathless, speechless. Like, come on, dude, Saw is incredible. And here we are 20 years later, 10 movies later, and still going. That's kind of all due to James Wan. So at that point, I was like, oh, dude, James Wan is it. Like, he's the guy. This is the guy for this era. And I didn't really ever get out of that mindset for at least a decade. He had other bangers come out. You had Insidious and Insidious Chapter 2, which I feel like is much maligned, and I really don't get it. I've always liked Insidious Chapter 2. Everybody loves Insidious, but Insidious Chapter 2 I feel like is definitely underrated, and that's, again, James Wan. And this is a guy who wasn't really known for doing sequels. It kind of wasn't his thing, and he often talked about how he didn't want to, and he didn't like it. So for him to come back and do Insidious Chapter 2 I thought was really, really cool. And the Insidious movies from the first one had me hook, line, and sinker. And then moving off of that, he created the Conjuring universe. Now, I know I may be giving him a little bit too much credit because these are based off of case files from Ed and Lorraine Warren, who were real people. Whether you believe what they did or not was real, they were real people, and these were their case files. So the idea was already there for Wan. He just had to kind of stretch it out into movies and make it his own, add his own flair. And if you know anything about the cases in the first two Conjuring movies specifically, you know that he embellished quite a bit in his movies to make them, I don't know, actually exciting movies. And The Conjuring, still to this day, is the scariest horror movie I've seen in theaters. It was the scariest experience I've had in theaters. I was 18 years old when the movie came out, and I just remember being blown away. Like sitting in that theater, hand over my mouth so many times, like I could not believe, as an adult now, that a movie could do this to me. And at this point, I knew going into it that this was James Wan. And I knew I was a huge James Wan fan. And he'd creeped me out before. But I didn't think he could do this. Hell, I didn't think anybody could do this. Then The Conjuring 2 comes, and The Conjuring 2 is easily my favorite Conjuring film. And one of my favorite horror movies ever, I think. I think it is just a beautiful story with great acting, stakes. You just get so much in this movie. I feel like it's an entirely well-rounded story and movie. And I think that it is every bit as good as the first one, if not better, except it's just not as scary. But I think everything else about it is better. Now, after The Conjuring 2, James Wan moved on to bigger and better things in his mind. He wanted to branch out. He didn't want to get stuck in horror. Until he came back a couple years later with Malignant, which was a movie that split the horror community in half. And you either loved Malignant or you hated it. I loved it. And I remember watching it the first time and being like, this is not at all what the trailer portrayed this movie to be, and I'm kind of digging it. And then by the end, I was like, that was a freaking blast. And it was James Wan's like action slasher that we hadn't seen Wan really do up to that point, playing in the horror realm. So I thought that was really, really cool. And I really wish he'll come back to horror soon, because this guy has left a lasting impression. So I just ran down the gambit of his movies that are incredible, if not just at worst good. He's got a really good resume, and the guy has created franchises that have gone on to gross billions of dollars. We're talking about Saw, we're talking about The Conjuring, we're talking about Insidious. This guy is legit. But then Mike Flanagan comes into the picture. In the 2010s is when I really start to notice him. The first thing I ever watched of Mike Flanagan was a little movie on Netflix called Hush. Now, I know it's not his first movie, but it was the first one that I caught. And let me just tell you that Hush was brilliant to me. It was a movie that I felt like had such an interesting concept. A home invasion movie with a deaf person. That is terrifying. The entire time watching that movie as the viewer, you're sitting there thinking about being in that situation and how helpless that would be, and at such a disadvantage that you are. How do you get out of that? I thought that that was super cool. And I really thought that the tension and suspense were ratcheted up to 11 in the movie. I loved it. That was my introduction to him. Then I checked out Oculus. Now, Oculus is probably my least favorite Flanagan film, believe it or not, but I still really like it. The reason that Oculus, I feel like, to me, is probably near the bottom tier of Flanagan is because I don't feel like the third act really brings it all home. I feel like there's still stuff that's a little bit confusing. Having said that, it's a really good movie with a really good concept. And I mean, if that's your worst movie, to me, you're doing pretty well. So at this point, I had my eye on this guy. This guy was somebody that I was like, okay, well, we'll see. We'll see what you're about. Well, lo and behold, the Netflix deal comes. And boy, did Mike Flanagan vault himself to where he is today in my mind with this Netflix deal. You've got The Haunting of Hill House. Everybody talked about how it was horrifying. And while there are a couple scenes in that miniseries that truly are horrifying, most of it is just drama that is horrifying as a human. Real world trauma and just terrible situations, terrible scenarios, heartbreak, sadness. It permeates the entire miniseries, and I thought it was incredible. Mixed with some creepy imagery and some good scares here and there, The Haunting of Hill House was a home run for me. Gerald's Game comes, and that was one of the Stephen King adaptations I didn't really know much or care about, honestly. But it was Flanagan, so I watched it. And let me just tell you something. Not only is the premise really kind of funny and also terrifying to think about, I believe it's the Midnight Man, if I'm not mistaken. The first time you see that guy in the movie, I'm like, oh, like, absolutely not. Terrifying. Like, terrifying. The helplessness. And then this, whatever the hell it is, no thank you. I thought Gerald's Game was great. I really, really liked it. And I'm surprised that I liked it as much. And I think because I wasn't expecting it, it made it that much better for me. Again, tempering your expectations sometimes can work out to your benefit. Then The Haunting of Bly Manor, which I thought was great as well. Not as effective as Hill House, but still an incredible miniseries. And then came Mike Flanagan's 1-2 punch. That, for me, makes him the GOAT of this generation. In 2019, a little-known sequel to The Shining called Dr. Sleep was being promoted. It was about to come out. Ewan McGregor was a part of it. He was cast as Danny Torrance. Consider me in. As somebody that loved the book The Shining and loved the movie as a kid, and is a huge fan of Ewan because he's Obi-Wan Kenobi, I was in. And being a Flanagan fan up to this point, I was like, yeah, of course, it's Flanagan. Let's do it. When I tell you that I was not prepared for just how good Dr. Sleep is and where it would land on my all-time horror movies list when I walked into it, I'm telling you the truth. I had no idea. Dr. Sleep absolutely floored me. I was completely enthralled by what I was watching on screen. I could not believe that somebody, by the way, I have read Dr. Sleep. It is nowhere near as good as The Shining. There are many problems. I could not believe that somebody could take such a flawed book and a sequel to something so beloved and make it better than The Shining. Now, I know some of you guys just recoiled. What did you just say? I said what I said. I have always felt that Dr. Sleep is better. And the director's cut, 3 hours, an extra half hour that the theatrical cut didn't have, it makes this movie so much better. Dr. Sleep is one of my favorite movies I've ever seen. So at that point alone, Flanagan could have left right there. He would have been at a high point, and I would have been like, you are the GOAT, sir. And then he comes with Midnight Mass. And I am ashamed that it took me over a year after this thing released to actually watch it. Because when I tell you this is one of the greatest things I've ever seen in my life, I mean it. It is one of the greatest things I have ever watched. For so many reasons. Flanagan delivered with Hill House and Bly Manor. You knew he could do the limited series thing. I didn't know that he could elevate above that. Does he ever in Midnight Mass? Look, if you haven't seen Midnight Mass, I'm not going to spoil it for you. But I'll just tell you this. If you have anxiety, if you fear death, if you have questions about the meaning of life and creation and whatever it might be, Midnight Mass is going to give you constant anxiety attacks. You're not going to sleep. Your mind is going to be racing. And while all of these things are being played out on screen and we're exploring them and thinking about them, it is led by incredible performances, truly heartbreaking moments, and some really freaky sequences. That's Mike Flanagan. That is Mike Flanagan, and Midnight Mass is easily one of the greatest things I've ever seen. Dr. Sleep and Midnight Mass are like this for me. Sometimes I'm like, is Midnight Mass better? Then I'm like, I can't do my girl Dr. Sleep like that. But sometimes I wonder. So given their body of work, both of them are incredible. They've done amazing things. There are so many things that each one of these guys has done that you could go, okay, yeah, he's the GOAT. He's the GOAT. You could make the argument for either one. I personally side with Flanagan because I don't think that Juan has reached the heights of Midnight Mass or Dr. Sleep. He has gotten this close. I mean, literally this close. But I don't think he's reached those heights. Furthermore, Flanagan is still in the game. He's not going anywhere. He recently released The Fall of the House of Usher, which I thought was phenomenal. Again, just another incredible limited series by Mike Flanagan. He is currently writing and directing the next Exorcist film. This guy's going to go for another 20 or 30 years, and I'm sure he's going to churn out probably 5 to 10 more absolute bangers. Meanwhile, James Wan seems like he has stepped away from the horror genre aside from being a producer, being an executive producer, being credited. That is James Wan's game now. With Atomic Monster, Blumhouse, he's not really a director of horror anymore. And, you know, more power to him. He never wanted to get stuck in horror. He was very open about that. He used it to get his foot in the door, and then he went on to bigger budget things. So I respect that for James Wan, and I respect where he is in his career. But let me just tell you, I really think that even if you make the argument that the two are neck and neck, Flanagan's going to be doing it for years to come. And I have a feeling he's going to turn out the best Exorcist movie in, I don't know, 50 years? And if that's the case, well, then I feel like this argument's over. So look, you can't go wrong with either one of these guys. And I wanted to give you guys my experiences with each one of these things that I watched as I watched them and how I grew to love these filmmakers. I wanted to give each one their flowers and make a case why you could say each one is the GOAT of this generation. But as somebody that has lived in this generation their entire life, I truly feel like the one that stands out for me is Flanagan, with James Wan as a very, very close number 2. But that's just my opinion. The next part of this equation is hearing what your opinion is. So I want you guys to sound off in the comment section down below. Is James Wan the indisputable GOAT, or did I make the case for Mike Flanagan? Or is it too hard for you guys to decide? Do you just give them both participation trophies and pats on the back? I want to hear in the comment section what you guys think. Thank you so much for watching this video. Leave a like on the video, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. This is Nick at the Lost River Drive-In, and I'm pulling out.